Great.
Hey, I get it. You all right? Everybody okay? I just got scolded by the first lady. All right, now, hey, there we go. You know why I put it on mute? Because y'all didn't want to hear me sing. Amen. So anyhow, we're talking about signs of the end times, and now we do not know when Jesus is coming back. The Bible says only the Father knows. But there are signs that we can see that's going to take place. And so one of the things that you probably never thought of, and first time I studied this, I thought, I never thought about this, but it has to do with oil production. It has to do with the world's oil production and how all of that is going to center around the Middle East. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. On August the 27th, 1859, a guy by the name of Edward Drake launched the modern petroleum industry when he drilled a 69.5-foot oil well. And that was the first oil well. It happened in Pennsylvania. It was the first oil well, a first well that was dug for the exclusive purpose of extracting oil out of the ground. Now, that started in 1859. Now, today, petroleum is not only the most valuable commodity in the world, it is also the most widely used commodity. And what's going on and of course, this has everything to do with our gas prices. But because the amount for a barrel of oil goes up and down and up and down, and it's actually a little bit lower now than it has been in the past, but because it goes up and down and up and down, what it's doing is it's causing an economic disturbance. And nobody would have thought 160 years ago when he did that first oil well that petroleum would become a bargaining chip among many of the nations of the world. And so prior to the discovery of all the vast oil reserves in the Middle East, nobody ever thought that oil would have anything to do with end-time prophecies. But I'm here to tell you tonight, there is definitely a connection between oil and what's going to happen in the future, especially even on into the tribulation period. Now, Jesus Christ in the book of Luke, we're going to look at that in just a second. Jesus Christ in the book of Luke often criticized the Jewish leaders. And one of the things he criticized them for was because they never looked for the signs of the times. Again, we don't know when Jesus is coming back, but he wants us to look at the signs of the times. So what I'm trying to tell you tonight is as you watch the news, and I've quit watching the news. I just can't handle it no more. But if you watch, I get all my news on Facebook. You know, if it's on Facebook, it's true, right? No, but if you watch the news or you pick up a newspaper, and if you start studying the Word of God, you're going to see some things that's going to take place in modern day times. It's going to point us to the end time. Notice the criticism here that Jesus had for the Jewish leaders. I'm in Luke chapter number 12. Look at verse 54 and follow. And he said also to the people, when you see a cloud rise up out of the west, straightway you say, there cometh a shower. And so it is. When you see the south wind blow, you say, there will be heat, and it cometh to pass. Ye hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it you do not discern this time? You know, they look off in the distance, they see a dark cloud, well, that means there's rain coming, or they look out there and they, well, it's going to be hot. But while they're doing all that, they can't even see the signs of the time. And so there's definitely signs of the times that are out there. And one of those things has to do with the important role that oil is going to play in shaping the end time event. So tonight, I'm going to share with you for a few moments before we spend some time in prayer tonight. I want to talk to you tonight about the world's oil supply and what all that has to do, again, with end time events. And so the first thing I want to share with you tonight is the control of the world's oil supply. Now, this is one of the things that I've had to change because, again, my study that I've been studying was written in 2009. So a lot has changed since then. So I want to give you the top 10 nations that have the largest proven oil reserves right now. By the way, before I give you this top 10 list, where do you think America is? No, sir. America's number 11. Number 11. Now listen to me. America's number one in something. I'm going to give it to you in a minute. That has to do with oil. But these are the top 10 proven now largest oil reserves. Now I'm going to give you this list, and I want you to pick up on a theme when I give you this list. You ready? Number one, believe it or not, is Venezuela. Number two is Saudi Arabia, Canada, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Russia, United Arab Emirates, Libya, Nigeria, and U.S. is number 11. What did you pick up in that list? Almost every one of them is in the Middle East. Almost every one of them. Canada, of course, is not. Venezuela is not. But almost every one of those is in the Middle East. And so here's the funny thing about all that. American companies years ago were the ones who went to the Middle East to help those nations develop that petroleum industry. But now the Middle East is now nationalized, and so all of that oil is controlled by the government of those nations. So let me give you this statistic. 60% of all the known oil reserves belong to a small group of Arab countries. 60%. That's a bunch. So even the countries that are not on this list, the top 10, that are not Arab countries, Canada's on our side, but Venezuela is against the United States. Even though they're not an Arab country, they are against the United States. And years ago, the president of Venezuela established alliances with the Persian Gulf countries in opposition to the United States. So when it comes to the control of the oil supply, America doesn't sit in a real good position. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this before I get to the second point. I've often wondered, when I first started studying the book of Revelation, and when I worked on my doctorate degree way back when, it seems like it was 100 years ago. But when I went and got my doctor's degree, I don't know if you know anything about getting your doctor's degree, but you have to write what's called a dissertation, okay? And basically, it's a book, to be honest with you. Mine had to be 12,000 words. And so I let the professor talk me into it, and I wish he'd have never done it, although now that I've gone back, I really enjoyed it. I wrote mine on the book of Revelation. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I started. But the whole time that I'm studying the book of Revelation and I wrote that dissertation, when you look at the end times, guess where America is? You're not going to find it. You're not going to find it. So I've often wondered, and this is back several years ago, so I've often wondered, where is America during all this? Because back when I was writing all this, America was a superpower. Well, now I've started to see some things happen. I got a couple theories I may share with you later on in the series. But one of the reasons why I believe that America may not be figured into the end times has to do with oil. And I'm going to explain that to you in a minute, because right now, when it comes to the end time events, because we are number 11 on the list, and 9 of the 10 countries in front of us don't like us. Now, Saudi Arabia, they're kind of on the fence, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But most of those countries are in the Middle East, and so they don't like us. And so the control of the world's oil supply mostly 60% belongs to the Arab countries. Now, here's the second thing, and this is what I really want you to see. And when I studied this, really opened up my eyes. Somebody said, was America number one on the largest proven oil reserve? But let me tell you what America's number one is. These are the consumers of the world's oil supply. The top 4 petroleum consuming countries in the United States is the biggest consumer, the United States. Number 2 is China. Number 3 is Japan. Number 4 is India. Now, the United States consumes 1/4 of all the oil produced in the world. Now, remember, we're the 11th largest holder of known reserves, but yet we're number 1 on the user list. Now, they say in the next 10 years to 2030 that America will be using up to 34% of the world's oil out there. Now, the Arab countries own 60% of it. So they say that we're going to use 34%. Now, on top of that, what goes with oil? Gas. America consumes 43% of all the gas produced in the world today. So we're working on getting up to 34% on oil. We're 43% on gas. So think about this for a minute. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure all this out. America's consumption of oil and gas compared to what we hold in oil and gas don't equal out very good. We're number 11 in producing it, but we're number 1 in using it. So what that means is several years ago, and you know this to be true, America started searching for alternative fuel sources. And one of the things they come up with was what? Ethanol. Now let me tell you about ethanol. Ethanol works, but now another thing they've done is they've started coming out with electric cars and stuff like that. And my nephew has a Tesla, and I like he won't let me ride in it for some reason. But he's got a Tesla, and those things they're pretty neat. But obviously they don't have a lot of them built. They're building more. But the vast majority of cars in America, of course, use gas. Now, so they started coming up with this ethanol. Now, listen to this, in order for every car in America that runs on gas to be able to use ethanol, listen to this. To grow enough corn to produce enough ethanol for all of America's cars, it would take 97% of our land to produce enough corn to provide enough fuel for all the cars in America. So again, rocket scientists figure this out. If they use 97% of the land to grow corn for cars, what's going to happen? We're going to have a food shortage. So when you think about all this, America has a problem when it comes with our consumption and our production. Now, that's one of the reasons I really believe that America may not be figured in the end times, because we're using more than we're producing. And so sooner or later, when we start getting into the 7-year period of tribulation, America's going to have to depend on everybody else for oil, and good luck with that, because some of them like us and some of them don't. And so that's where you start getting your oil prices. That's what starts affecting the oil prices. So that takes me to my third point, which is the conflicts over world oil supply. There have been people that are fighting over this for years. And Arab control over much of the world's oil sources began when the Arab nations went up against Israel in 1973. In 1973, they started a war with Israel, and it was called the Yom Kippur War. And in October of 1973, those nations got together, a bunch of those Arab nations got together and agreed to reduce their oil supplies, not only to the nation of Israel, but guess what? To all the nations that were friendly to Israel. So guess what? That's us, especially in 1973. And so what happened back then is oil price quadrupled to $12 a barrel in 1973. Now I wish it was $12 a barrel now. It actually has been well over $130 a barrel at one time. Right now, and I just checked this out yesterday, as of yesterday, oil is $42 a barrel. Okay, but in 1972, because of the war over there, it quadrupled to $12 a barrel. So in 1980, then President Jimmy Carter in a State of the Union address, established something called the Carter Doctrine. And whether you like Jimmy Carter or not, the Carter Doctrine actually is a pretty good doctrine. And the Carter Doctrine says this, that any nation's attempt to limit the free flow of oil through the Persian Gulf would be met by military force from America. So guess what happened? 1990, Gulf War. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait in an attempt to take over Kuwait's oil supply. So then President George H. Bush Sr. implemented the Carter Doctrine. And most of you remember that. He drove Iraq out of Kuwait to protect American interests in the Persian Gulf. Then came the invasion of Iraq in 2003 by George W. Bush. Now, of course, that had to do with retaliation from what happened at 9/11. But what most people don't tell you is this, is even though the invasion of Iraq had to do with terrorism, it also had to do with oil. They went over there to get Saddam Hussein, mainly because, and those guys over there, mainly because, they had attacked us on American soil, but it also had everything to do with the oil. And so all these conflicts, and guess what? It's going to get even worse over the years, especially if America continues to use more than it produces, and then we're going to have to depend on somebody else. Somebody's going to have to fight to get some oil because they're not going to give it to us. And when they do give it to us, it's going to be outrageous, and then Americans are going to pay at the pump because that's when your gas prices start going sky high. So here's the crux that I want to get to tonight. I want to get to you. I've given you all this information. I know there's a lot to digest tonight, but I really want to focus on the concerns about the world oil supply because there's a lot of questions that we have to answer that involve us and involve Israel because Israel, and I'm going to tell you about their oil situation in a minute, but because the Arab countries control 60% of the oil and we're using it more than anybody else, we have several questions to ask. Number one is this: are we running out of oil? According to some estimates, the world supply of oil is sufficient to power global economies at the present rates of consumption for another 100 years. That's estimates. Now, that's obviously going to fluctuate, but here's the problem with that. The problem is that we don't have access to all that oil because we are only number 11 on the list. Now, if all the oil was distributed evenly, they say we could run another 100 years and without any problem whatsoever. But the problem is that we don't have access, and so again, we're consuming oil faster than we're producing it. So that leads to the next question: can we protect our sources of oil? And the answer is it appears that it's going to take a lot more than just military might to ensure an adequate oil supply, because 6 years after we invaded Iraq, the oil price per barrel went higher than any time it's ever been in the history of the world. And that's when it went to just over $130 a barrel. And that was just because they got mad at us because we attacked them, and because they control 60%, they raised the price. So here's the big question: is there any oil in Israel? Former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir once said this as a joke. She said, "Moses dragged us for 40 years through the desert to bring us to the only place in the Middle East where there is no oil." Now, that's not 100% true. Although there's less oil in the deserts in Israel than there is in Saudi Arabia and those other places. But there are two companies that have been formed that are now exploring oil in Israel. And part of that is they look at a reference in Ezekiel chapter 36:11, which says this: God, and I'm paraphrasing, God will do better for Israel than he did at her beginning. So in other words, they believe that Israel will be more prosperous now than it was in the beginning. Now, it's hard to imagine it being more prosperous than it was in the days of Solomon, but the Bible says it will, and so a lot of folks that are living over there believe oil may be the key. So there was a guy by the name of John Brown, good old American name. He was a Christian, and he was the founder of the Zion Oil and Gas Company. And he believed that Deuteronomy 33 and Genesis 49 indicate that there is oil to be found in the area of, and the territories of the tribes of Asher and Manasseh. So in 2003, Zion Oil and Gas Company was given a license to explore 95,000 acres in that area. Now, as of 2016, they found some oil in Israel, but here's the problem. As of 2016, Israel has an estimated proved oil reserve of 14 million barrels. Now, that sounds like a lot, but it isn't, considering Venezuela has well over 250 billion. And so that puts them way down on the list of oil reserves. But here's the problem. The country has virtually no way to produce that oil. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the machinery. They don't have the stuff to produce that oil. So while they do have 14 million barrels now, any oil they find in the future, it's just hard for them to produce it like everybody else. And so how does that affect our future? Oil may turn out to be the commodity that shapes alliances between nations. Let me tell you what Ezekiel said in Ezekiel 38. In Ezekiel 38, the prophet Ezekiel described a day that's coming when what is now Russia, along with Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, and others, will attack Israel. Now, that's going to happen at the Battle of Armageddon. Now, we know Russia, but anybody know what Persia is called now? Persia is modern-day Iran. Okay, and that happened in about 1935. They changed the name to Iran. So Ezekiel said that there's coming a day when Russia, Iran, Ethiopia, Libya, and all those would attack Israel. Now, when you begin to read the book of Revelation, as sure as I'm standing here, that's going to happen. But listen to this. For at least 2,500 years, Russia and Iran never got along. But guess what? They now have an alliance. And you know why they've got an alliance? Because it has to do with oil. Everything centers around oil. And so all of that alliance that Ezekiel talked about is all taking shape. And so the reason that all these countries over there are coming together is because they have all this oil. And so they're able to share with each other because most of them are Muslim nations. And so they're able to share all that oil together. And so that's why they've got all these alliances. And so not only will there be some military and political alliances, but there's going to be some petroleum alliances that's going to take place. Most of the world oil, again, supplied by all the nations that are not friendly towards Israel. Now, the only two over there that are somewhat friendly to us is Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And so far, they've been friendly towards us, but you got to remember this. They are part of the Arab world. So when push comes to shove, it could be that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait may turn on us one day. We don't know. So again, that's one of the reasons why when you read the end times, where is America during the end time? America's still here as a country, but America's way down the list because we're using more oil than we're producing. So sum all that up by saying this. What does that mean for us, okay? I know some of you like me, you don't, the only oil you deal with is what you put in your car. And you don't even do that. You let somebody else do it. So the only oil I touch is the oil I put in my lawnmower. So some of y'all thinking, what does all this have to do with me? Well, let me tell you what it has to do with us as Christians. You ready? As Christians, there's three things that with all this tension going on, and I'm amazed at the number of Christians because they don't understand what's going on, they get scared. I've talked to a lot of Christians over the past 2 or 3 months who are just scared to death. They're scared to death of COVID. And then, hey, I don't want COVID. None of y'all want COVID. But they're scared to death of COVID. They're scared to death of all this that's going on. And they're just scared to death, and they don't understand what's going on. And what you need to understand is when you look at all this stuff, the Bible does not want us to be discouraged because God's got everything under control. Okay, this COVID didn't just show up and God said, man, I didn't know all this was going to happen. Angels, what we going to do? We got to call a business meeting in heaven, and we got to figure all this out. No. Trust me, God wasn't worried about the murder hornets. God ain't worried about the protests. He knows all this was going to happen. And all of this is part of his great big plan, okay? And so there's three things as a Christian that we need to do. You can write these down if you want to. And I'm getting ready to get Jimmy to read something. Three things, real simple, 3-point sermon, real quick. Number one, we got to keep on waiting. We got to keep on waiting. Read Matthew 24, 32 through 34. Jesus used the fig tree as a metaphor for the nation of Israel. Now, here's what he said to his disciples. Here's what he's telling us. He encouraged them to be aware of what's going on around you because all of these events are going to start unfolding. So what I told you last week, if you wasn't here, when Israel became a nation in 1948, that was all was foretold in the Bible, and that's important. And so over the next several weeks, as we're going to get into even deeper stuff, why are we studying all this stuff? Because you need to know what all this is going on. So as we're waiting for Jesus to return, we're keeping an eye on what's going on. And so we're waiting. But and here's the thing about waiting. Our waiting time is becoming shorter. Because I believe, and I remember growing up, grew up in that good old hand clapping, foot stomping, hellfire and brimstone preaching Baptist church. And I remember since I was a kid, some of you do too, the preacher always said Jesus is coming back. Y'all remember that? Well, I'm, 50-something years old now, and he ain't come back yet. Now, does that mean all them preachers were wrong? No, no, no. But I'm looking now at some things and again, as I studied the book of Revelation, I had a lot of questions. I had more questions than I had answers. Now, as I'm starting to read Revelation, I'm thinking, okay. I'm starting to see that. I got another theory about America. I'm gonna go ahead and give it to you. I don't know if this is true. It's just this is my opinion. Okay, the oil part's not my opinion. This is my opinion. I believe sooner or later, America's going to elect a socialist president. Okay, it's gonna happen sooner or later. Now, not saying it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen in November. I don't know that. Sooner or later, America's gonna elect a socialist president. Because here's what people don't understand, and you can't argue, as one preacher said, you can't argue with a stump. And there are some people who just are so ignorant about this stuff, it's like arguing with a stump. So when people hear the word socialist, you know what they think about? Free. I get something for free. And they don't know, like everybody else in here, nothing's free. You got to pay. Somebody got to pay for that. And so they think all of this is free. Well, what they don't understand is, guess who's giving it away? The government. So guess what the government's going to do when they give it away? They're going to control you because they want something. Nobody, hey, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And so socialist government, what's going to take place? This is my opinion, guys. Don't go ahead and say this is what's going to happen because Rob said it. This is my opinion. So I believe because we're using more oil than we're producing, and I believe because one day we're going to become a socialist government, America is going to go down the tubes. So when the 7-year period of tribulation comes, and they're going to have this one world government, and the Antichrist is going to step up, and he's going to take over. And that's another question I've always had. How in the world can one man step up and take over? How in the world has the government controlled us since the middle of March? Again, COVID's real. I'm not denying COVID. No, it's real. People have get it. People are dying. But some of this other stuff along with it, they're controlling. They're controlling the numbers. They're controlling all this stuff. And so listen, it's almost like I walk outside and I say, you know what? I was walking in Walmart the other day and I said, I feel like a sheep. I'm just following everybody else because this is what we're supposed to do. And so in just a few months, the government and others have just controlled us. Told us, basically said, you got to close down your church. And buddy, when they arrested a pastor in Tampa, I thought, they arrest him, they'll arrest me. I ain't gonna get arrested, so I'm gonna do what they say. And we can argue whether that was right or wrong, and I'm not here to argue all that. But my point is, what's going to take place in the future is America, in my opinion, is going to start going down the tubes. And because we don't control the oil, because some of the richest nations in the world are those Arab nations, everything's going to center around them. So America, as far as people, will still exist, but we'll be like I don't want to say a third world country, but we won't be what we are today. And you folks have seen it. Okay, if you've been watching, you folks have seen it. There are things going on today that you never thought would happen in your lifetime. See, right now they're telling you, you know, there's a coin shortage. I don't believe there is, but they're telling you that. Because all of a sudden coins are disappeared. That's why I'm selling, you know, quarters, 50 cents. You know, I'll give you 2 quarters, you give me $1. But no, I'm kidding. But see all that, see, now, there will be a cashless society. That's what they're going for. You know why? Because it's easier to control. It's easier to control. And you're right. See, you know, when I was growing up, how many of you had did you ever hear the word debit card? No. You paid cash for everything. Yeah. You know, I'd go mow the grass and they'd give me $1, $2 or $3, and hey, money. Or I'd go drink my Coca-Colas or whatever and go turn that in for a nickel or something. Money. It's all about, you know. Now, you know, when you go to the bank, you're going to get a debit card. Why when Jimmy came to me several months ago and we was talking about this tithely, which was a God thing. We never knew in March we was going to need that. But I told Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, there are people like my son, your grandson, people in this generation who have no idea what a checkbook is. I remember in school in math, we had a class on how to write a check. No, you know, these millennials or whatever you want to call them, they don't know how to write a check. They don't know what a checkbook is. Everything's card, paying your bills online, and all of that, you know, all of that's going on, and all the scams that are going on. You know, I get so tired of the scam. You know, I had one guy call me and said, you know, we got a warrant for your arrest from Social Security and something fraud or something. And so I just felt like playing along for that day. So I pushed 1. And the guy, normally I just hang up and then I hit, you know, your phone does have a block feature. You can block that number. And so my problem is most of those numbers come across as an 813 number. So I think it might be a church member, and I'm scared not to answer it because somebody may need me for something. And so anyway, so I clicked number 1, and the guy said, yeah, what's your name? And I've made up a name. What's your zip code? 71358. I just come up with 5 numbers. Yep, we got you down we got a warrant for your arrest. And I gave the guy a fake name and a fake zip code. I don't even know what zip code I gave him, but, you know, he wanted but people, there's all kind of scams. And a lot of times they're getting these senior citizens. They're going by and saying, hey, you know, I'm going to trim your trees, but I got to have a little bit of money up front. And then they leave and they never come back. And it's happening all the time. And so, but see, those are just things, you know, growing up that we just never thought about. Now, I never thought about calling somebody on the phone and ripping them off. Just never entered my brain. And there are people that are they're getting pretty good at it. And they're coming up with new. Mm-hmm. They ain't doing it. First of all, my last TECO bill said that they're postponing cutting off because of COVID. And I'm not going to push that. I'm not going to say, I ain't going to pay my bill. No, I ain't going to do that. But, yeah, and TECO's come back and said, we don't do that stuff. We don't do that stuff. And, you know, my credit union, I'm with Suncoast Credit Union. I got an email the other day saying, we will not call you and ask you account information. We don't do that. And so, you know. So anyway, but so we got to keep on. Now, all of these tensions are going on. And we got to keep on waiting. We got to keep our eyes open because God's purposes are being worked out. Now, that's number 1. Keep on waiting. Here's number 2. Keep on working. Our task while we wait for the return of Christ is very clear. We're to keep working until his return. Now, here's what happened, and it happened in the Bible. Paul wrote 2 letters to the church of Thessalonica. 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. And the bulk of the letters of 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians is those people thought that Jesus was coming in their lifetime. And so what some of them did was they just quit working, just kicked back. And so Paul admonished them, it is never right for us just to kick back and not do anything because we think Jesus is coming right away. And so what happened to those people is they were disappointed because their expectations proved false. Jesus himself said in John 9:4, I must work the works of the one who sent me while it's day, because night's coming when no one can work. And I believe with all my heart the reason Jesus didn't tell us in the Bible, I'm going to come back such and such a time. Let's say I'm going to come back September 2020, because here's what would happen. In the month of August, I guarantee you I'd do it. If I knew Jesus was coming back in September of 2020, I'd take a vacation in the month of August and kick back. Some of y'all looking at me spiritual, you probably would too. That's why he didn't tell us, because we are to work until he comes. So we got to keep on watching. We got to keep on working. And here's the third thing. We got to keep watching. We got to keep looking to the sky for his return. According to God's sovereign plan, I thought about this the other day, and this kind of blew my mind. According to God's sovereign choice and plan, you and I are alive at this particular moment in history. Do you realize that God could have made us to be alive at any part of history he wanted us to be? But you and I, by the providence of God, are not only here in 2020, but we're here at the Countryside Baptist Church on a Wednesday night. This is all the providence of God. It's all the providence of God. And here's what C.S. Lewis said. C.S. Lewis said, it is our calling to be here when we are, but our lives are rooted not only in the here and now, but in heaven as well. So here's what we're doing as Christians. We got one foot on the earth, and symbolically, we got one foot in heaven, and we're waiting. And we're kind of, for lack of a better term, we're kind of between two worlds. But our ability to keep watching for his return without fear is based on the confidence that we have been called to serve in this day and this time for such a time as this. Here's what the late, great Vance Havner said. He was a Southern Baptist evangelist. He said, we're not just looking for something to happen, we're looking for someone to come. And he said, and when these things come to pass, we're not to drop our heads in discouragement or to shake our heads in despair, but rather we are to lift our heads in delight. We're to look to the eastern sky because our redemption draweth nigh. And I'm reminded of every time I go to the cemetery. I don't know if you knew this. Some of you probably knew this. Everybody is buried facing east. Y'all know that? Everybody's buried facing east. Because when Jesus returns, he'll come from the east. And so when they rise, the dead in Christ rise first, they're facing him when he comes. Amen. Isn't that great? And so, because I always, when I do the graveside, as a pastor, I always position myself at the person's head. So what I do is I wait for them to put them in the pallbearers to put the casket there, and then I position it myself at the head. And I know I'm always right because they're looking east. And so because Jesus is coming back. And so, hey, listen, I wish I could tell you it's going to get easier, but it ain't. But we got to keep working, got to keep waking, got to keep waiting, got to keep watching because Jesus is coming back. All right, I want to go to the Lord in prayer tonight. I've got some names I want to give you. You probably got some names you want to